Nightfam, have you ever imagined the worst possible torture you could ever experience? I'm talking about things from history, like the horrors of wars or punishment for crimes when ancient kings and queens ruled. We've seen so many of them, bodies being impaled, men getting dragged by vehicles by their hands, waterboarding, and probably the most popular, crucifixion. But in this video, I will show you 7 torture methods you may not have heard about. Like these rats trapped inside a heated cage on a prisoner's naked belly. In the Elizabethan era, rats were collected in River Thames to torture criminals held in London dungeons. They would be kept in a cage, pan, or bowl that's topped by a burning coal. As soon as the rats felt the heat, they would try to escape it by eating their way through the prisoners' bellies, gnawing on their skin and guts. And speaking of bellies, American soldiers during the invasion of the Philippines would jump on Filipino captives' bellies full of water to make them vomit it. The torture is ironically called water cure, which began in the Middle Ages in Europe. Victims are forced to drink gallons of water and sometimes even sewage by pinning them down and holding their mouths open. Then, when the victims' bellies became full, they would be poked by spears so they'd burst. In the case of the American soldiers in the Philippines, they would use this torture method to make their captives talk during interrogation. And this isn't the only torture in this list that involves water, because in China they also used water to torture the mind. And surprisingly, they only did it by drops. Because it's known that water can carve a stone with constant movement, captured criminals were led to believe that it could also do the same thing to their skulls. A dripping machine would slowly drip cold water onto the scalp, forehead, or face for a prolonged period of time, drop by drop. It drove the criminals insane, feeling like the water drips would bore a hole through their heads. See, the worst tortures don't need to involve physical pain. Sometimes they don't even need a device to be effective. All that is needed is just one color, like this white room torture. It is a modern psychological torture where a prisoner is placed in a room where everything is white, from the walls to the furniture and the floor, and even their clothing and food. Lights are strategically placed so that very few shadows appear. The purpose of this method, aside from complete isolation for several months or even years, is to deprive the prisoner of all senses and identity and make them go crazy. Now, the next torture is for women who were called crazy by their husbands. One of the worst things that we could feel in life is being silenced. And that is why this device from the 1500s called Scold's Bridle is considered torture for outspoken women. Their voices were suppressed by an iron muzzle with spikes that pierced the tongue. And those who were punished and humiliated with this were said to be naggers, gossipers, or even witches. They would soon lose their ability to speak because of the infection caused by the spikes, not to mention the extreme pain that sometimes could kill them. The next torture also involves killer spikes, but in the form of barnacles. The keel-hauling method was created during the Age of Sails. While at sea, some sailors would commit different crimes and get punished. The condemned was tied to a rope, then thrown overboard and dragged through the water to the other side under the keel of the ship, scraping against really sharp barnacles. If you think that is brutal, wait till you hear this final example. In the torture method called escapism, criminals in ancient Persia would get sandwiched between two boats with the openings together. The arms and head would be left outside the boats through holes and drenched with milk and honey to attract insects that would bite and sting. Their faces would be continually turned towards the sun, and it would become completely covered up and hidden by hundreds of flies feasting on the milk and honey. The criminal would soil themselves inside the boat without a way to escape the trap. This would invite worms and rats inside the boat that would also feast on their body until they die a tragic death, with the boats floating along swamps and rivers. As I speak about all these different old torture methods, one thing for certain: we are lucky to live in today's world where these methods are very rare.